Right, good afternoon and welcome to our fourth evidence session on inquiring into the audit inspection of local authorities. Just to begin with, for the sake of our records, could you indicate who you are and the organisation you represent?
Matthew Sinclair, I'm the Director of the TaxPayers Alliance.
Rebecca Veazey, I'm a Policy Officer for the Women's Resource Centre.
I'm Belinda Wadsworth, Strategy Advisor for Local and Regional Policy for Age UK.
Right, you're all welcome. Could you begin with a general question? So what difference do you think the abolition of the Audit Commission will make to the quality of local services? Yes?
And I think it will improve them. I think it will lead to councils being better focused on the outcomes that local publics need. I think it will lead to better value in audit, and I think it will broadly be a good thing for local government performance.
I think that would be a bad thing for frontline services. I think that the Audit Commission played an important role in promoting equalities, and particularly the comprehensive area assessment provided a tool for ensuring that women's needs and issues were taken into account in local priorities, and that outcomes and improvements had a significant impact on women.
Clearly, the Audit Commission carried out a number of important functions that we would like to very much see continued, and we want to work, given that the Audit Commission is being abolished, we want to work with the remaining organisations to make sure that whatever is put in place subsequently produces better outcomes for older people.
I suppose there's a tension there in what you said between the view of the Audit Commission as trying to do something on behalf of central government with regard to standards of performance and doing comparisons, or whether it should actually be looking to a more localist agenda and assisting local authorities to, perform better, get their own priorities right. Is that a fair description of the way things may have been in the past and how change may be looked at for the future?
I think that the problem of the Audit Commission is that it was, as a national quango, adopting the kind of form that worked in terms of its organisation, being a national quango that worked for the National Audit Office looking at central government, and was applying that to local government. And for that reason, I think that it was a very centralising force, and that was part of the problem. So instead of women's issues being represented by that 50% of the electorate in each individual seat, it was being written through this organisation, acting out national government priorities, and that the star system, I think, was the most clear example of that tendency coming into election.
I think that the work of the Audit Commission and the framework wasn't by any means perfect, but I think it provided a way of holding local authorities to account. And I think that in practice what the WRC has found is that there's a lack of gender awareness at a local level. Many local authorities fail to meet their obligations under the gender equality duty. So these things already aren't being met at a local level. I think that by having a national overview of how local authorities are performing on those issues is almost a form of a safeguard.
We're comfortable with the functions that previously carried out more at a central level being carried out more at a local level, but we are very keen to make sure that there's continued oversight of those functions.
Mark?
Just turning on to the abolition of the CAA, don't you feel that the CAA was more process than outcome?
I think that to some degree it did produce outcomes. I mean, for women's organisations particularly, they used it as a mechanism to almost enforce the duty to involve. They used it as a way of engaging in local decision making, and it kind of almost empowered them to challenge the representation of women and women's issues in local leadership.
So, I've spoken to so many councillors and people at councils who got good marks under the CAA, who viewed it with contempt. And if you can give someone a gold star and they can resent it, then I think that says that something's gone pretty badly wrong with your system. And if it gives a lever for women's groups to get involved, I don't think that local politicians are going out of their way to ignore women's needs. You are talking there about an issue which should have a pull, and that accountability should happen through the ballot box. And one of the reasons why it might not would be that councils are chasing Audit Commission rankings instead of chasing those votes of priority. I think it displaces other forms of accountability rather than being a pure addition to accountability. So we need to be thinking about some of what was missed and what we should be trying to recreate. And it should be our job to bring accountability in local government organisations like ours. We shouldn't hope for a shortcut through saying, well, listen to the CAA. It should be listen to us because we can try and persuade voters.
Can I just make a point following on from what Matt has said? I think that in realities we're seeing equalities being equated with bureaucracy rather than being the most effective way to meet the needs of communities. And I think that the abolition of the Audit Commission and the issues of abolition of the Comprehensive Area Assessment are quite sad because we're seeing the public sector equality duty being watered down, and we're seeing that marginalised women who deal with our women's organisations and are involved in their local communities find that local authorities aren't willing to engage with them in practice.
I think the best way of ensuring that people see the equalities duty as associated with bureaucracy is to have it acted out through the Audit Commission. If you have bureaucrats enforce the equality, then people will see that.
Age UK, like to get a word in?
Last year we carried out some research talking to a number of older people's forums and organisations, to local strategic partnerships, local authority staff, into the value and impact for older people of the previous system. And what our research found was that the majority of people we spoke to did feel that that previous system was particularly bureaucratic and onerous and was very process-driven rather than outcomes-driven. However, there were a number of key lessons learned from the system, which I feel we should make sure carry on. For example, the partnership working approach, that very much needs to be built on. And we did see some very significant and very positive examples of where older people were very much involved in the decision making around those processes, and we would very much want to see that continue.
Then, in terms of if the other elements of equality, engagement falls away as you fear, wouldn't the equality impact assessments pick that up, and that there's a duty to engage and to be seen to engage and take those views into account?
As far as I know, under the new changes with the public sector equality duty, there won't be that onus on doing the equality impact assessments, or at least not publishing that out to the public, which I think removes a mechanism for holding local authorities to account, which I think is partly the objective of that decentralised auditing regime.
We very much share the concern about the equalities legislation apparently seeming to be watered down and there not being such a strong recommendation on reporting around that. And we would very much encourage any subsequent system to take a very strong equalities approach.
Right. So if you want to look at impacts you see as negative, as a group like ours, we can do that. I don't think we need, we can be on the watch for those. We can have grassroots networks who let us know when things are going wrong. I think that we should be using our own analysis to reveal when these systems break, rather than relying upon whether it's impact assessments or the CAA to do that for us, because I think that we can do that job better. I think that's why we have to be here.
The government's clearly got an agenda to do away with the centralised regulatory regime that we've had up to now, and sees a big plank of an alternative route as being transparency, making authorities publish every item of expenditure of over £500, for example. But the Audit Commission did bring out some performance data. How did, particularly the campaigning bodies here, how did you make use of that information? What was it useful? Was it helpful in your activities?
We very much support the move towards transparency and having information more publicly and freely available, absolutely. And we conducted a small focus group research of the One Place website last year, and found that all the people we spoke to found it very, very useful indeed, easy to understand, and we're very happy to use it. So for those people we spoke to there who are online users, clearly very useful and very accessible. However, 60% of people over 65 never even use the internet. So for us, there's a major concern about information being only provided in an online format, and we very much want to see that as the transparency agenda goes forward, that we have information produced in a number of different formats to make it very accessible, very easy to understand.
But don't you think the fact that publishing it online means that newspapers will print it, and that people who you would engage with will get the information through a different route? It doesn't,
that's one-way information. That's fine to get the information, but if you then want to use the information in order to engage, then you need to have access to being able to analyse it in the way that you choose to look at the services that you're looking at.
I would say that one of the problems with publishing the data is that data is not very useful unless it's disaggregated, unless you're making it accessible, and unless you're providing it with some form of context. And I think the major objection that my organisation has with this armchair auditing approach is that it's very reliant on the capacity, inclination and education of citizens, and we're concerned that marginalised groups won't necessarily be involved.
But won't the media do that for marginalised groups? Isn't simply the fact of making it available means other people will do the analysis?
But I think the fear is about inconsistency of that oversight.
I think, yes, it is possible information can go out there and can never be used. So councils were, as far back as the 80s, required to publish publicity information. That never really had bite to raise the issue of whether that's a cost that should be controlled till we did a report on it. But in the end, that's going to happen. That's what groups like us should be doing to assist the media. The media will do it on their own. The media are very interested in these sources of information. They get apoplectic when they don't work properly, when they struggle to access them, as they did with in the early days in coins before the best tools came out to analyse it. And yes, some people who don't have the inclination to access data won't be able to access data, but still you're opening it up to a vastly wider array of groups and individuals by publishing it like this than previously were. So you will get a greater variety of perspectives.
And would the people who aren't able to access the data have read the reports from the Audit Commission?
Possibly.
You think so?
Well, maybe. It depends how accessible they found them. As I said, the people we spoke to who'd used the online system had found it accessible. But no, I agree. I mean, public information needs to be developed to be far more accessible than it is currently if the public are going to be able to hold public bodies to account in the way that this transparency agenda assumes.
I've read Audit Commission reports, and I've also read spending over £500 releases, for example, to give one example of a transparency release. And honestly, I found the latter, in many cases, much more comprehensible. It is at least clear, and it is at least functional. You've got to do more analysis to get information out, to get sort of conclusions out of it, but at least you're not having the analysis done for you in a fairly inscrutable way.
But is it the view of people representing older people and women that we're going to lose something as a consequence of the lack of Audit Commission reports?
I think it's more about, as we go forward, how we make public information very, very accessible and also very comparable from area to area, because while we are, quite, as I said before, quite happy about localist principles of local solutions to local needs and local information, local assessment, the public will also want to be able to compare area for area.
With regard to women's groups?
I would say I agree with Amanda's comments.
But back to the point, are we really empowering groups like yours, Taxpayers Allowance, rather than empowering the public? Because it's true, the analysis won't have been done for the public by the Audit Commission, but it'll be done for the public by you, won't it? And you do have a political axe to ground on most of these matters, don't you?
What's great is that we can do it, and then people who disagree with us can do it, and we can have a proper encounter between those two understandings of the information that's come out. I think that we're breaking open a monopoly here now. You don't have to think that you want our reports to be the gold standard here, but no one's setting them up as that. We produce our work and we make it absolutely robust. But if people disagree, or if people don't think we've made it robust, they can challenge that, and our credibility depends upon getting that right to a very high standard. We don't have the imprimatur of being a government, being a public sector body of supposedly speaking for the government or anything like that. All we have is our own credibility, and we have to put that on the line, and that's what we'll continue to do. But it doesn't have to be just us. All of us, all the organisations here and hundreds of others are responsible for analysing this information and then for talking to our grassroots supporters and trying to find new ways of getting it out to the public. That's our job.
Some people might say that the Audit Commission, well, be a government department, is generally relatively neutral. Well, an organisation like yours probably gets quoted more than any other organisation on these matters, so you've got a pretty good monopoly of quotes in some of these areas. Is actually got a political point of view to address?
We've got plenty of points of view, but I mean, I'm saying that that we can be disagreed with, and there's plenty of resources available to organisations who disagree with us. So they're not starved of cash, starved of researchers. There's plenty of people out there who can come out with both points of view, and you are blowing that open by transparency to such an extent now that we will have it done by a multiplicity of organisations, and they'll take different routes. Some will go the direction of saying, quite independently, that they are there just to check from as unbiased a perspective as possible on the veracity of factual claims. I was talking to the website Full Fact, who have set themselves up to do that very recently. There's plenty of organisations like that. There'll be some who are saying we have beliefs about the best policies, and we see this evidence as supporting that. And there'll be groups who do it just because they have a particular stakeholder group who they want to try and inform. There'll be all kinds of different approaches, and I think they can compete. We've got a free market in policy analysis as well as in audit as a result of this.
Any comments? Some.
Yeah. Should future inspection activity be limited to services to vulnerable people then, or scrapped altogether? What's your view?
We are concerned about the scaling back of inspection. And certainly we're very clear that inspection of vulnerable people, for the safeguarding vulnerable people, must continue. Yeah.
We would agree and say that inspection on the promotion of equality and protection of vulnerable groups is most important to maintain.
I think if you're looking to promote the interests of women or the elderly, then the people who are best placed to do that and should do that are here. I don't think that that role and that scrutiny role of local government has to be performed by civil society, who can do it genuinely independently, who can do it not with an eye to the latest directive, but with an eye to looking for genuine problems. And I think that will lead to a better performing system. I just think that's not one which can effectively be done by an organisation that needs to be putting the information out there. I think the audit role is where you still need something, because we need to know that information that's being released is in fact accurate at the start, because we need to have that solid empirical foundation. But I think that's where it should be. It should be at that audit stage, not at the performance stage.
So you don't think that there should be inspection from the centre in terms of local authority services to vulnerable groups?
I think accountability should flow through voters and should flow through scrutiny from the third sector. Yeah.
And you think that electors, residents are attuned enough with the services provided by a local authority to various vulnerable groups, whether they be older people or vulnerable women or anything else? I think they're able to make a judgment. Generally better attuned by the Audit Commission. To the extent they're not, we've got to make them that way. That's the only way you'll have reliable protection for vulnerable people. And you think that vulnerable groups can rely on a change in every 4 years potentially an election to determine whether their services improve or not?
Well, I think they think that that's the purpose of representative democracy isn't just that you lay down the law once every 4 years, but that you have effective scrutiny in between, and you have people concerned about thinking about those 4 years. Every 4 years is just there as a sort of Damocles hanging above people's heads. It's not there to be the only form of scrutiny or the only democratic function during that period. No, I mean, there are improvements we can make there, but ultimately I think scrutiny of performance should be done through the third sector, through civil society, and through elections. I don't think it can effectively be done by the Audit Commission.
I would just say that I think that theory could lead to inconsistency and oversight, and I think that's one of the main reasons why we favour the Audit Commission, is that we think that it provides.
For us, it's very much a both and. We're very clear that independent external inspection and audit needs to continue, but we also want to encourage older people themselves to be able to speak up and speak out. We're working very closely with CQC on a project with called Experts by Experience, where older people can go and take part in the inspections that take place. And we very much want to encourage that kind of activity. But for us, it's very much a both and. It's working hand in hand.
Yeah, I just want to say, I attended an involvement event organised by Age UK in Rochdale this morning for travelling down here, and there were plenty of older people, dozens of older people making their views clear about what they're going through locally, economic situation, and everything else. It's a good qualitative technique as well.
Can I just ask how Age UK and the Women's Resource Centre, can you give us any examples of when you've looked at an Audit Commission report and used that information to call a local authority to account?
The research that we carried out last year throws up some very good examples of where older people have been working very closely with the preceding structures, the local strategic partnership, and influencing the local area agreements. In particular, in East Sussex, older people have been involved in every single decision-making panel in the county, and I also know a very good example in Wiltshire where they've been very much involved in decision-making and on scrutiny panels, and very much influencing the decisions.
I accept that, but that doesn't need the existence of the Audit Commission to take place, does it?
It does need the existence of a performance management framework that they can be
but
involved
nobody's
with.
saying we're going to get rid of performance management. We're simply saying the Audit Commission aren't going to do it. So authorities will continue to have that, and that information will continue to be available to organisations such as yours. So why should the abolition of the Audit Commission be necessarily a bad thing?
I think we've been clear that we are looking to see the continuation of a form of performance management framework, and as we said in our written submission, for us that could be locally as opposed to nationally defined.
And the same point to the Women's Resource Centre.
In terms of the comprehensive area assessment, that was used by women's organisations to increase representation in local strategic partnerships. In terms of the question that you've put forward about the need for the existence of the Audit Commission, I would say that our main argument behind that is because the framework has helped us in the past, and we're unconvinced whether under a decentralised regime it will actually work, and we'll get that same performance management framework which will evidence the outcomes that we want.
Okay. Is there a danger you can get one authority that really is failing, and if it's failing, its performance management might fail, and if there is no oversight, it's hard luck for those disadvantaged children who are getting an awful service and maybe put at risk if they're going to have to wait for an election in 3 years' time?
I mean, some of those cases you've had existing structures and authorities have continued to fail. Those are very deep-seated problems in some local authorities, and I don't think it had none. I mean, we had the Audit Commission writing reports about authorities saying that they've been irredeemably, unutterably failing for 15 year. So you can pose these questions of what if there is an authority that just continues to fail, where there isn't a sanction of voters, or where that's ineffective, and you can come up with these sorts of what if you're in an elevation and it's burning, you're in an impossible situation, what do you do? And those have existed, will exist, and there are troubled authorities. And we're not saying this is a panacea that solves that, but the present system doesn't have a panacea either. And the best way of improving those has to be engaging through local structures. I mean, if you look at the last question, all of these. Local routes to engage with how the council manages its performance can happen, and councils, and this is I think part of what we should be getting away from with the move away from the Audit Commission, is to have councils setting up structures to manage their performance which reflects local priorities. So all these things can come into being, and they can be driven by effective councils and effective councils. If you have failing councils, failing councillors, I don't think there's any evidence that the present system is able to really kick them out in a serious way. It can, in the end, say central government needs to as its ultimate sanction. And I think that the extent to which you still need a powerful central government to in a case of absolute failure, step in and remedy the situation. Again, if you need someone to ask for that to happen, it doesn't need to be the Audit Commission. That is because it is in the end a very political judgment, and I think that it will be made politically, and it will be made on the basis of groups demanding it. It doesn't need to be the Audit Commission. So I don't think in those just impossible situations, the Audit Commission offers something invaluable.
No.
Just a quick one. Has the Taxpayers Alliance done any evidence or any research to show that many of the authorities that have had significant service failures have either had glowing reports on inspections, been four-star authorities, or indeed been Council of the Year? Having been a former council leader, when we went for Council of the Year, we were often advised not to, because usually the year after, you crashed and burned.
So like manager of the month in football team. Yes.
I mean, has the Taxpayers Alliance actually done any analysis?
We haven't done that. It's a good idea. We've looked at before is generally we looked at using. We were considering at one point, because we have various reports about things like the one that came out last week, the Town Hall Rich List, and we considered, well, should we look at, is there any correlation between how well paid all these chief executives are and their performance as measured by the star system? We decided, we weren't going to give that even a tacit endorsement of the quality of that measurement. It's a pretty reasonable idea, but no, it's not one we've done systematic research into.
Yes, in the last financial year, the Audit Commission conducted 24 national studies and spent £5 million doing them. I'd be hard-pressed personally to name them, but that's a matter for opinion. How useful are these national studies, and do you think they provide value for money? Could I start with Matthew?
I don't think they provide value for money, because I don't think they have anything like the effect that you can see from other reports, both those produced, because there are lots of groups. Even if you just look at the generalists, there's us and there's organisations like Demos, Policy Exchange, New Local Government Network. So there's lots of organisations producing reports on which are, I think, both achieve a much higher profile, have a much more significant effect. At the same time, if you look at a comparison to something like National Audit Office reports, for example, they don't have anything like the same authority to them. They don't become in the same way. They don't attain that same power. So it's just so rare to see them cited, I think, which I think shows that they aren't getting to the core of these issues, or they aren't doing so in such a way that people really find them indispensable. So I'd say, to that extent, and given that £5 million for 24 reports, I think you said those are some pretty expensive reports, I'd say they represent very poor value.
Rebecca?
I wouldn't say I'd be best placed to comment, but happily defer to Belinda on this one.
Fine. Belinda, I know you found some of the reports useful.
Indeed, there are a couple of reports very much stand out for us. Don't Stop Me Now, published in 2008, and Under Pressure, published in 2010. And for those of us that work in the age sector, these are incredibly important reports that really reflected a state of play with regard to tackling the challenges of an ageing population within local authorities. And reports like that will very much be missed. We feel very strongly there's very much an ongoing role for an organisation to produce similar comparable reports.
But you're experts in dealing with older people. Why shouldn't an organisation like Age UK do the same sort of thing, because you're experts already?
We can produce similar reports. We do indeed produce a number of reports. The issue for stakeholder organisations like us is actually about the accessibility of the information on which to base those kind of analysis.
With the new reports. Transparency, you've got all the information, you can interpret
we are ever
the data.
Hopeful. But, and that is absolutely critical for us, that stakeholder organisations who do have that capacity to provide that kind of information, produce those sort of reports, we do have open access. It isn't easy at the moment, I can tell you, so we're very much hoping that that will open up.
And how should you be funded to do it, if you were to do it?
I'd have to come back to you on that. That's okay.
Rebecca, in terms of your organisation, you're experts in dealing with women in various different guises,
Yeah.
vulnerable women as well as creating greater equality. Why couldn't you do a national report on the state of the nation, as it were?
I mean, capacity-wise, we're to the full at the moment, so realistically we wouldn't. But I mean, our role is we're a national membership body which supports women's organisations up and down the UK. So our primary area is in research. But we do feel that it would probably be best placed for the government to conduct that study, and that we would be given the opportunity to feed into it.
Yeah, but clearly the government is not going to do this. Well, it's quite clear. The government will not do these studies in the future. So you're saying this is a potential risk. So are you prepared to step in to the breach?
I'd have to confirm with my chief executive, but if you were willing, we would consider it.
Okay. And Matthew, here's a golden opportunity.
Yeah, hey, look, we try. We do our bit. You know, we're a small team, but we'll do this. And there's lots of, as far as funding goes, there are plenty of people who are interested in these issues, and fundraising is a challenge for organisations like that. It's a challenge for anyone, but I think it's much better they're funded by people who are interested in the issues than that they're sort of becoming part of that public sector nexus. I think it gives it greater independence, ideally by a broad base, and that's how you need to continue this work. And we're not. Age UK is not a poor organisation, and they are a substantial body, and they do very large, heavyweight reports, and you can improve data availability and should. But I don't think there's any reason that there's an inherent lack of capacity for policy reports in civil society.
Thank you.
I just want, given that the Local Government Association has been talking about the work they might do amongst their members to try and get some comparative data, maybe look at comparative studies of various kinds. I just wonder whether any of you talked to the LGA about whether you could sort of act in partnership with them on some of this work.
Not directly, not yet. But we're certainly very open to working with the LGA partnership. Yeah.
We tend to have an adversarial relationship with the LGA,
yes.
And we're quite comfortable with that.
We're probably not going to get the marriage made in heaven today.
No, look, some of what there's some stuff where the LGA if they want to do more of this, that's great. I think honestly the LGA probably aren't the best organisation to do it, because they have a deep problem trying to work out who they're representing, because they're representing councils who fiercely disagree with each other. So I think they're probably better organisations to do it than the LGA, but there's loads of them. There are loads of organisations interested in this. There's no shortage of people interested in local government policy questions. This is not a shortage of anything.
So.
Yeah, there was some consensus, I think, earlier about the need to continue to do audit of local authorities, local government. But my question then is about whether they can remain independent if they are appointed by the local authority itself, as opposed to something like the Audit Commission. I wondered whether you had a view on that. Start with you, Matthew.
I think that's a system that can work for Tesco, BP and Vodafone, can work even for Kent County Council and Birmingham, so the largest of their respective types of authority. Those concerns about independence are important, which is why they're addressed by both massive corporate risks to accountants who get it wrong. And we've seen examples when accountants haven't been sufficiently rigorous, and it has led to death for even the largest accountancy firms. So there is a very heavy sanction. If it goes wrong, there's equally regulation. So regulators from the National Audit Office to PricewaterhouseCoopers are all regulated by the ICAEW, which has a very high reputation. Doesn't mean the system isn't perfect. It doesn't mean we don't need to be extremely hawkish about the relationship between auditor and audited. But the best way to do that is to do it once for companies. There is a very specific issue with central governments as regulator, and that's why I think the DNAO is a very different case. But local authorities, I don't see any reason why they can't, why we'd want to do the business of regulating auditing twice. It's a big job. And I think we do it once and we get it right for corporates and for councils, and there's no reason the same system can't work for both.
But it's public money, isn't it? Tesco's.
Sure. It's public money, but it's enormously important. If there's a failure of financial controls at a major corporate, it's extremely important. And that I'm not going to, and the last one here is to decry the importance of it being public money, but it's important with respect to who you're accountable to, not who does your auditing. The audit just needs to be rigorous, and I think that to the extent we can ensure that, we need to ensure it for corporates and for councils. I think we can. I don't think that accountancy is a great failure which we wouldn't want to let touch any other industry. I think that regulation that regulation is one which we can shift across from the existing private sector to local government.
Yeah, just to follow that, because I can change from, you mentioned Tesco's, I can stop shopping at Tesco's if, I don't shop there anyway, but you know, I could move to Morrison's. I can't at the moment change from Rochdale Council in terms of service provision. You don't.
You're not just
I'm going to say,
Matt,
let me just say, there's no need, no safeguards, additional safeguards, because it's a public sector, public money.
No, the additional safeguards have to be over accountability. Your problem in the end in the public sector isn't a lack of auditors, it's a lack of shareholders. It's the fact that you can't go elsewhere. It's that you need to have a substitute for that, which should in the end be the public and votes, and it's why I'm absolutely 100% with you on the fact there's a big difference between these two, but I think that it's not audits where the difference between them needs to manifest themselves. It's greater democratic accountability, and it's heightening that process steadily through reform, which needs to be in place. I think that the audit function, that basic making sure that financial records are accurate, that job, I think, is the same. We just need to use that information in different ways, because they should be accountable to very different groups of people.
Belinda, what's Edge UK's view?
Well, our view very much would be about the need to continue the independence of audit, and we're not specialists in public audit, so really these are broad principles, and the need for audit to be regulated in order to maintain public confidence in public spending.
Okay. Rebecca?
I would say that the latter point about maintaining public confidence is very important.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for a very lively session. Somewhat different views, but that was all the better for it. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution.